Well, hi, everybody. David Amato here, music director of the Atlanta Classical Orchestra, and I am thrilled to be joined via Zoom by Drew Petersen, our soloist for our concerts coming up. Hi, Drew.
Hi, David. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. So I am so looking forward to playing Chopin second with you 4 times. Like, that's kind of an amazing luxury we've got here at the Atlanta Classical Orchestra. So I have obviously I've been thinking about Chopin a lot. I mean, I'm a pianist, not like you're a pianist, but I did, went through my paces. And I haven't thought about the second piano concerto of Chopin in a really long time. And so I just haven't done it, whatever, right? So I, going through it, studying it, and it's like, how certain smells can sort of transport you to another time and place. Well, going through the Chopin, it felt exactly like that. Like I was completely brought back to like college days and pre-college days and sitting in piano class. And like, I could even like smell Amtrak from Philly to New York, that I took every week. And this like all the stuff just came bubbling up. And I'm wondering what your relationship with the piece is like when it started. And
That is so interesting that you bring up this kind of perfume and this very like specific kind of like the sensual thing. This piece always, to me, it evokes all kinds of sensations, particularly like taste and smell, this kind of thing. Is it's so perfumed, right? It's a certain kind of like, it's so, for its time especially, so chromatic.
wait, do you have synesthesia?
I don't actually, but for some reason, this piece always inspires me in this way. Although I would say that Amtrak smell, maybe not so much, but I know where you're going. I know where you're going with that. Like the
Experiential,
environment
right?
you were in when you were really, digging around in the piece. That definitely, that makes total sense to me as well. But fortunately or not, I did not have that similar experience going from Philly to New York back and forth while learning this piece. It's kind of been a concerto that I've always loved. It's one of these pieces that I immediately fell in love with the first time I heard it as, I don't know, maybe a preteen, long time ago. I can't even remember. First time I feel like it's just one of these pieces that's just been sitting around in my brain for a long time. I first took a crack at learning it, I think, soon after I really worked heavily on the first concerto of Chopin's when I was 13, 14 years old. And that, at the time, this piece of E minor concerto was a huge reach for me. And I remember I even got to play with Orchestra, the local Bergen Philharmonic in northern New Jersey. And I thought, oh my God, what was I in for? This like really difficult stuff. And the second is, of course, difficult as well. So I thought, okay, well, the first is 10 minutes longer than the second. So how hard could the second concerto be? It's shorter. It doesn't appear to have quite as many notes. So I tried my hand at it. Never really got very far with it until quite a few years later. I mean, for me, at least in the scale of my lifetime, or in my early 20s, I was asked to play it a few more times. The most memorable performance of which was with Carl St. Clair out in California with the Pacific Symphony, which was really lovely. That performance was interesting though. And keep in mind that I've always loved this piece so much. I've always been super invested in it, whether I was playing it or listening to it, whatever it may be. One of my favorite concertos of all time. I only had one rehearsal. Barely even a rehearsal, a read through 2 hours before the single performance we did of it together. Miraculously, Pacific Symphony, Maestro Carl, really great collaborators. It all worked out better than I would have ever expected. But to think the contrast that I get to have now with you and the ACO, where we not only get more than a read through to rehearse it, but also 4 times performing it, is really
it's a huge luxury. And I have to tell you that well, there are a number of things. I mean, in terms of accompanying this piece, I mean, first of all, I've got to say the orchestra part. So we played our first concert, we played Korngold Violin Concerto, which is this, the orchestra part is extremely intricate and very kind of engaged. Chopin was not the greatest orchestrator. In fact, I guess there's a lot of question as to whether he even orchestrated these pieces himself. And the orchestra parts are challenging, mostly because the piano part is so flexible and fluid that the orchestra just simply needs to fit into that flexibility. But the parts themselves aren't they don't provide any kind of real technical challenge like the Korngold did. So, but nevertheless, I think one of my great joys as a conductor is accompanying. I really truly love it, and so it's just a pleasure to be able to have a lot of rehearsal with a soloist, because there's so much. It's this extra dimension, right? It's this extra layer of communication that happens, and I
so appreciate that philosophy, that attitude of yours. I had a great time, at least, working together on Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto with Delaware Symphony last season already.
I think it was, yeah, that was great.
God, it feels like yesterday. It's so fresh in my mind. It was such a memorable, such an engaging, wonderful experience for me. And that philosophy is so important for this piece. Obviously, what's also important is, regardless of your kind of characterization of your pianistic abilities, you know this solo part really well. And this is a solo part I feel like I've spoken with many conductors about, and they always talk about all of these ornamentations, all of this filigree, all of this melisma that goes on in the piano part. It's sometimes difficult to keep track of all of the notes, the 40 notes beamed together, all this stuff. But that will not be an issue for you, because you know the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be some issues, but thank you. Yeah, I mean,
No.
You know, in looking at it again and thinking about it, and thinking about Chopin in general, particularly, but also, like the virtuoso piano music of that era. And I guess in a way I include Beethoven too, because Beethoven wasn't dead for very long when this piece was written, right?
Right. And he was a virtuoso pianist, so.
Yeah. So I wonder sometimes, but especially with Chopin, because the music is so technically demanding. What effect modern instruments or period instruments have on your ability as a player to execute these things, which really are I feel like they're just at the threshold of possibility. You know what I mean?
Right. It's interesting you bring that up, because I've been playing in solo recital a number of Chopin's Études, which are, if you want to talk technical pinnacles, this is like he's really, like, at this point in time, exploring the farthest reaches of what the human can do at the piano at the time. Right. And of course, it's a very interesting experience, especially. It's funny that I keep going back to, like, kind of my relative age, but over the course of my life, I've already seen a kind of evolution in my own physicality. One, I feel like I'm smarter about getting around the instrument than I certainly was when I was first approaching the Chopin Études as a teenager. But that being said, as one gets smarter and wiser, one's physicality also evolves. And I already can notice in the last couple of years, the physical mechanism, my body doesn't respond and bounce back as quickly as it used to when I was a little kid. And it's something to think already at the ripe old age of 29, I'm dealing with this. But let's think about all these athletes who are retiring by the time they're my age. And for better or worse, as pianists and instrumentalists and conductors, I would consider too, you're waving your arms around, certainly. We're athletes of the small muscles. And when you're talking Chopin, we're talking intricacies that are so demanding, so difficult, that if you move the hands and wrists in this certain way for long enough, even if you're doing it perfectly and healthily, you're going to get tired. And my body gets tired more quickly now than it used to. And be that as it may, regardless of if I want to practice Opus 10 number 10 Chopin Etude or the third movement of the second piano concerto, both of which I have been practicing a lot recently, my body can't take it for very long. So I have to be smart about how I expend my physical energy. And this kind of motion, this kind of a thing, it looks innocent right now, but you do it for 3 hours. That's a lot of hours. And you could spend infinite hours on some of these passages and never feel 100% comfort. There's always that element of chance, especially when you bring into it not just, of course, the actual execution of playing all the notes, but you want to phrase it, you want a different articulation, a different piano might provide not just challenges in terms of a different sound, but opportunities in terms of the different sound. Like you have registral shifts and whatnot. And to get back to the point about Chopin's pianos and Chopin's time, the one thing we do know, or maybe there's possibly two things we know. We know that Chopin definitely preferred playing the lightest action pianos available. I think we also know that a lot of the pianos available in the early 19th century had slightly narrower key widths. Nothing significant, but enough so that when you start adding up kind of, note by note by note, an octave, say this is 8 notes, with typical from C to C, D to D, typical kind of configuration for a pianist to have to negotiate. Though it might have been a large stretch for back then, it might have been equivalent to, say, a 7th, which is 1 key less on the modern piano. And that little difference in terms of, say, this is about what an octave is to my hands, from thumb to pinky, right? On the modern piano, a 7th is maybe about this. Doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're playing one after the other octave, one after the other sixths, whatever it might be, you might be able to explore different fingering combinations. If it's slightly narrower, you might be able to shift out certain fingers to give other fingers a little rest, whatnot. And it might just allow the hand to be able to execute these passages a little faster, a little more brilliantly, without so much risk of injury. And it might also allow one to be able to practice more. So there's all kinds of considerations like this. We can't really worry about this too much, though, because unfortunately, or for better or worse, I'm playing on the modern piano.
Right.
And that's what we have to do.
But it is incredible to me that people like you, I mean, this, modern pianists are able to achieve these things that Chopin intended for on a piano with narrower keys, probably keys that didn't go down as deep either.
Very fair.
Incredibly light. And I don't know. It's amazing you can do it. It's awesome.
I think it's just a question of being smart, right? I mean, we also have had the experience, the collective experience. We think about our teachers growing up have been taught by virtuosos. They're virtuosos in their own right. We have our own experience at the instrument. And then we figure out, okay, maybe Chopin could have done some things with the hand and the wrist. We still need to use that, but we can also use this part of the arm, the elbow to kind of, allow the balance of weight to help us achieve certain things on the modern piano with that deeper key depth, the slightly heavier action that Chopin might not have had to rely so much on this to help to move from note to note, this kind of thing. But, it's just, we practice enough to be safe and secure, not too much to hopefully injure ourselves.
Right. Right, it's a balance.
The fine balance, yeah.
So it's also interesting, and the piece really is gorgeous. I think that no other composer, maybe no other composer, I was going to say of the first half of the 19th century, but that's limited. I think that
there were a fair number of them though in the first half of the 19th century.
But I think really nobody else captures the what's the word I want here. What I want to say is that his writing is so fundamentally vocal in that there's this like cantabile quality, but it's not an imitation of the voice because it is to the piano what the voice is to the voice. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's like the piano analog to opera. You know what I mean?
In the most refined, spectacular, showy, elegant, emotionally engaging. He somehow manages to capture everything, and yet it's always him, right? It's like he has written his name, he signed his name in every single phrase, and it could be no one else's but Chopin. And this brings up another really good point. Is one, I have very few pet peeves when it comes to transcriptions. This is it seems like a non sequitur, but it's related, I promise. So we have this practice where Chopin is guilty of this list, his fellow comrade in arms, piano virtuoso, composer par excellence, is super guilty of this, if you will, of transcribing opera for the piano, transcribing symphonies for the piano, transcribing songs by Lieder, by Schubert, Schumann for the solo piano, and vice versa can happen too. You can have other instruments taking from the piano literature. And I'm totally for this. I think there are oftentimes very imaginative, fun results from this practice. There is one kind of transcription I personally cannot stand, and that is any other instrumentalist or singer taking music that Chopin wrote for the piano and trying to play it on their instruments. Because for whatever reason, that to our point about Chopin's kind of vernacular, his syntax, whatever it is, this emotional thing working on the piano and being really for the piano, there's something in the way he constructs a phrase, the way he strings notes together, that sounds so captivating on this flawed box that can only diminuendo. We can never, when we play a key, we can never make a crescendo. I mean, I remember your aunt Barbara Mallow complaining to me so much, a great cellist as well as great pianist. The piano can't make crescendo. This is such a frustration, but Chopin manages to evade that and actually, I think, use it to his advantage. He constructs these themes and this material that is always sighing into this like beautiful thing. And then he'll stir up something and make a crescendo by other means, but he's always taking advantage of this property of the piano.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think that it's. I mean, what I find so. I mean, you brought up Liszt, whose music I don't think I universally love, but there's an awful lot of Liszt I do love. But I think of Liszt and Chopin I mean, I think they're alike in the sense that they are that their thinking begins at the keyboard, right? Regardless of what they're writing for. And you could say the same thing about Beethoven, right? But I think certainly Liszt and Chopin. Where I think they diverge is that Chopin somehow manages to, I don't know how, but he somehow manages to transcend even the furthest limitations of the keyboard. Liszt, I feel like, gets to the limitations of the keyboard, but he doesn't go beyond it. I mean, maybe some late Liszt he does, and I think like the sonata he does, like the places he does, but not always. You know, I feel like Chopin much more consistently manages to use the piano only as a kind of a springboard to get somewhere totally other.
Right.
And it's extraordinary to me because, you know, you listen to a Liszt piano concerto and it's amazing, right? I mean, what it takes to do that is breathtaking. Sure. And you listen to a Chopin piano concerto and it also is breathtaking, but that's not what you leave with, right? You leave with some kind of the sense of being transported to this like unbelievable place of extraordinary beauty. I mean, the harmonic language, and again, you know, Liszt's harmonic language is also very interesting, but it's not always, it's going to sound, maybe this is controversial, but I don't think it's always so beautiful. I think it's always effective. It can be dramatic, blah, 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 but Chopin at the core, Chopin is beautiful.
Yes.
Harmonic language for the late 1820s to be like that. Yeah. I mean, this is bonkers. This is, I mean, absolutely crazy. I mean, I wonder whether he knew that he was like violating every rule there was to, I don't think he did. I just thought he probably was like, this sounds great. So that's what I'm going to write. And I'm like, awesome, you go.
And this second concerto, the F minor concerto, is such a testament to that, right? I mean, the E minor concerto, as brilliant as it is, in many ways, I find it to be much more conventional and much more kind of just like, you know, dare I say, formulaic. I mean, it's what limited knowledge I have of these two concertos is the second concerto was written first, is kind of the consensus, right? The second minor concerto was written first, and then the E minor concerto came slightly later, but Chopin published it first, hence that's number one. And what little I've read about this was the E minor was the one that he was touring, if you will. I don't know if he did so many concert tours, but this was the concerto that he would present to the public to win them over. It's a little more extroverted overall. Not that the F minor doesn't have its moments of extroversion, but it seems a little bit more kind of accessible, a little more straightforward harmonically, a little more, the themes are a little just that much less beguiling in a way. There's a certain kind of directness to the piece, and it's very charming, very beautiful, very innovative, all these great qualities. But the F minor to me is always felt much more personal. It's like Chopin wrote it for himself, and he was just doing whatever, to your point, whatever he wanted to do. And convention, who cares? You know, this kind of thing.
And, you know, that's exactly why the second half is what it is on this program. So we're doing the Ravel Mother Goose, the complete Mother Goose, which I think has shares a lot of these qualities, right? I mean, plus it was originally piano piece, or piano four hands at least. But it has that sense of unbelievable imagination and deeply personal, that not all Ravel has. A lot of Ravel has it, but this in particular feels just so, you know, of Ravel.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
and for him and for these kids that he wrote these four-hand piano pieces for. So I think it's a good one.
That's so great. So, and back to the idea about Chopin and the sense of beauty. I mean, to me, Chopin, what makes him so intoxicating, captivating at his best, and dare I say, even a little dangerous at his best, is in playing it, of course, it's very difficult, as we discussed before. That, I feel, is the last thing on anyone's minds when listening to a great work by Chopin, such as the F minor concerto, because it's just so beautiful. I mean, and it's not necessarily the most overt displays of virtuosity like Liszt can do, and like Chopin can do in some other pieces. But in general, Chopin he's a little under the surface when it comes to the difficulties. He likes to really hide it inside the beauty. But then for the pianist, in addition to it being very difficult, I often find that when I'm playing Chopin my very best and engaging with the material my very best, there's this kind of mercurial danger in his music always. Like when you're just looking a little below the surface, and it's, I think, best exemplified just clearly based on, you have these beautiful placid moments of this very simple, deceptively simple melody accompaniment, not so difficult to play per se. There might be a little ornament here or there, it takes a little practice, but really, like any talented, you know, single-digit-year-old pianist can approach these pieces and actually play them. But then Chopin will throw in some incredibly difficult passage work right where you want to be able to just open up and emote and just, you know, stay in that peaceful place and feel in control. But then he starts throwing all kinds of difficulties at the pianist, that some of which, I mean, you hope and pray that they work the way you want them to. And then you think, okay, I can make sure they work the way I want them to. But then maybe I'm going to make it sound too formulaic. I won't feel as spontaneous and as kind of uninhibited. So it's this kind of feeling of at once being in control, but also feeling limitless capability to just do anything and let the emotions kind of well up inside and take me where it needs to go. And like balancing that can be so terrifying.
I'm sure. You think, but you said it so beautifully that Chopin hides the difficulty in the beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, you know, somebody like Liszt, I think, tries to maximize the glitziness,
right?
You know, because that's what it often happens.
Yeah, and Liszt and Beethoven, and you could even say some pieces by Schubert where he's being virtuosic. You can kind of like grit your teeth and get through it, and there's something exciting about that. Chopin doesn't really let you do that. You can't, like, it's not just like it doesn't really serve the music, which of course it doesn't, that's primary. But secondarily, but also importantly, some of these passage work with these passages, if you try to just like, you know, get yourself ready in the zone and get all like, you know, poised and just go for it, they're not going to work, because that thing that you're relying on to execute is complete fluidity and relaxation. So it's kind of, there's some arpeggios and whatnot in the first and third movements in particular, where if you try to just like, you know, go for it and do this a little bit, you won't ever be able to play these passages because they don't rely. Whereas you're playing a slew of octaves in a list, you literally have to just like get into position and be ready for the fight and this kind of thing. And then it works brilliantly. It's funny thing.
Right.
Chopin, it never ever works. And even when you think it's gonna work, it might work. It's not to say it might not work, but it's not gonna sound the way that you really want it to. You want it to just have this like incredible, this sense of beauty, emotion, the danger, vulnerability, and yet you're just it's like figure skating. I imagine like you watch the Olympics and you see these artists on ice and you think, well, they're clearly not just like gritting their teeth and bearing it. They have to be so free and yet so controlled at the same time.
Right. No, that's great. That's yes. And I think one of the reasons that I respond, and it sounds like you too, to the music of Chopin is because there is this fundamental motivation in it that comes from just beauty. That the technique, it's never about the technique. Amazingly, I think even in the etudes, which are like really hard and they all tackle some impossible issue. And of course it's about technique. That's why they're etudes, right?
Right.
But you can't play them like that. It's music first. And I think everything with Chopin is music first. And man, do I love that.
Yeah.
So I'm so looking forward to you joining us. And I can't wait to have four opportunities with this gorgeous, gorgeous piano concerto. So thank you. Thank you for joining me today. And thanks for coming to Florida to play Chopin with us, Drew.
It's my absolute pleasure. And thanks, David, for picking this piece. I assume you're responsible for this concerto.
I am. I'm guilty.
Yes.
Yeah, charged.
Because it's just so spectacular. It's like, but it's more than just spectacular. It's so personal. It's so tender. It's so intimate and elegant and beautiful. It's all of these things, and it's one of a kind. I can't think of any piece quite like it. So it gives me so much joy to be able to do it 4 times with you, great partner in crime, and the ACO, who I'm so looking forward to meeting.
Oh, me too. Thank you, Drew, and I'll see you soon.
Yes, see you really soon. Have a good one.
You too. Take care.